Evening, everybody. How you doing? Have you had a good day? We got a couple of thumbs up. We got a big smile. That's good. Somebody's laughing. Okay. Some few grumpy faces as always. That's fine. Okay. I appreciate Tom for filling in last time. I realized though that I didn't really cover the last two verses of chapter 2, and I'm not going to do it unless you ask a question about it. So, do you have any questions about 1 Peter chapter number 2, 24 and 25? We read through it, but I didn't really say a lot about it, but maybe we don't need to say a lot about it. So all of you, not at once, ask your question. What is your question? Not at once, everybody, because I'm not going to be able to hear you and understand. Chapter number 3. Okay, so what Peter does here, he starts to, so in chapter 2, it was a lot about, towards the last half of the chapter was a lot about submission. And he touches on different areas, a couple of different areas in the first century life. One was the relationship that the Christian have with the governing authorities and how Christians are to conduct themselves and submit to the authorities. And then he covers servants in verse number 18 about servants and their masters. And we talked a lot about that and how Christian servants were to be submissive because as servants, that's what their role was. And even though if their master was treating them harshly, they were still to act like a Christian. And that kind of led into Peter describing the suffering of Jesus. And that's kind of where it ends in 25. And so now he kind of picks up the submission discussion again in another part of first century society, I guess, which would be the home. And he starts with, or the marriage, I guess marriage, home, so I'll use those interchangeably. And then, and he starts with the wives and then the husbands he deals with in verse number 7. So let's read verses 1 and 2. He says, wives, likewise be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives, when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. And I know I'm reading from the New King James, and you got another translation. There's going to be a couple of words, just a little bit different there, and I'll try to explain those. And if I don't hit on it, then just ask about it. So I want you to note that the purpose, just in this particular context that he's talking about, the purpose for the submission was to win over their husbands. Now, what does that mean? Repeat that to me in another way. They're going to win over their husbands, he says.
They want to be Christians too.
Okay, basically convert them to Christ. Convert them to Christianity. Now, for the wives in those days, and non-Christian and Christian, included in submission. So remember what kind of world we're dealing with. We're dealing with a first century Greco-Roman world. So included in submission was adopting your husband's religion. Like it was almost like it was a given. Like whatever your husband is into, you're going to be into it too because you're the wife, and that was involved in submission. Now. If the man became a Christian, we would say that's good because then the wife would naturally follow his lead. And I would say she wouldn't just obey because he did it and she's being submissive. But I mean, I think that would be part of it though, but because it's Christianity and the way Christianity ought to be taught, then she would also obey the gospel because she would have believed just as much as he did, although his example in being the head of the home would obviously have a huge influence on her. So if if the man became a Christian, the wife was very likely to follow. Okay. But if a woman became a Christian and the man and her husband did not, then, and I think we could even picture this today, we can see how, especially in their days, how we can see the difficulties that would arise in the house. Yeah, can you, I mean, I don't think it takes a big imagination to figure that out, right? There's gonna be some problems, a lot of headbutting and a lot of, well, I would say, probably abuse and suffering, especially in those days. Obviously, there were some wives, members of the church, Christians, because that's who he's writing to, suffering in this situation. Now, I don't know if it could it be physically, possibly. He doesn't really get to it, but obviously there's some suffering going on because remember the whole context, he wouldn't have addressed this in this context of suffering if that wasn't the case, right? So there was obviously some people, some Christians were hurting. Some Christian women were hurting because they had obeyed the gospel and their husbands were not really following along. And so it might be the same, with the servants and the masters. The servant obeys the gospel, the master doesn't care, mistreats them. Well, there's a way the servant is still supposed to act. And it's the same with wives. So in order to keep peace and order in the house, Peter advises these Christian women to be submissive to their husbands as submissive to their husbands as God will allow. Right? So you couldn't go above and beyond something that God would call sinful or things. Right. Any comments so far? Just absorbing all of this. Okay, good. Now, even among the Greeks, so you had, let's say, from the Jewish perspective, you had Jew and Greek, Jew and Gentile, Jew, everybody else. To the Greeks, it was Greek and barbarians, Greeks and everybody else, right? And so now, for who they call the barbarians, the heathen kind of people, the unsophisticated kind of people, the Greeks were a step ahead of them in treating women. So in a lot of cultures in those days, and I guess in some pockets they're still out there today, really, when women were like no better than slaves. Women were on the equal par of slaves, and then men were way up here. Now the Greeks were better than that a little bit. So women were not on the par of slaves, on the same level as slaves. Women were up here, but the men were up here. And so they were kind of in the middle, better, but not how Christianity would teach it, right? And so Christianity comes along and basically puts a stop to all that. With the teachings that came out from the apostles and other inspired writers, from Jesus, all of that went, that was no more. That was supposed to be no more. Christianity was going to change everything, but here's the thing, it wasn't going to happen overnight. And God never meant for it to happen overnight. Just as Christianity was never given to abolish slavery, like right out of the gate, and it wasn't. Neither was it Christianity meant to like upend all of these societal traditions and cultural practices and their societal systems right away. Christianity wasn't ever supposed to do that. Christianity was supposed to kind of like, and it did eat away at the way man thought things should be done. And it did. Now, it's not to say that women aren't mistreated today. It's not to say there's not some slavery that goes on in the world today. But who would argue that we've come a very long way as far as mankind is concerned? I mean, would you agree with that? I mean, ladies, aren't you happy you live? I mean, even if some abuse happens, I mean, would you rather live in 21st century America, or you would rather live in, like first century Arabia or something like that. No. Okay. You wouldn't want to live as a Muslim woman either, I don't think, even today. Take for example, one of the great verses that show this is Galatians 3:28. Galatians 3:28 is something that you might not be able to recall it to your mind, like exactly word for word, but I think every Christian should know what's in there. What's that about? And it says, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female. And he says, but you are all one in Christ. Equal worth, equal value, right? Galatians 3:28. And so as that particular truth, and there's some others that are very similar to that. So as that particular truth reached into more and more homes, the gospel went out over the world, the mistreatment that was taking place in the world, in homes, between husband and wife, directed toward women, because that's the way man kind of, thought how things should be done. Well, that mistreatment was going to slowly be replaced by God's will, right? You get it? Do we get that? Okay. But, in the first century, it would have been, and wives are still supposed to be submissive today. Ephesians 5 teaches us that, and I don't know exactly how much I want to get into that, but I'm going to get into enough of it, I think, where you're not going to have any questions, I guess. But if you have any questions, and I'm moving on, you're like, hold up, wait, you got to stop me.
Chuck.
Yes, sir.
Just qualify something in verse 1 of chapter 3, where it says, to mine is American Standard, to your own husband. Was there a hidden meaning to using the word own, O-W-N? Why didn't Peter just write to your husbands?
So it may be, so I think this would be, he's definitely targeting wives who have non-Christian husbands, right? Because he's saying by your cunning, you're going to win them over. It may be the case that that Christian women, because of the equality that Christianity brought them, and because of the liberty that Christ affords, then she may feel like she is to only treat other Christian men in a right way, but her non-Christian husband, well, you can't. And she might get to a point where she is acting not as a Christian woman. And so maybe he had to qualify to your own man, basically, is what it's saying, to your own husband. So the way you're going to treat other Christian men, you really need to treat your own husband, who's not a Christian, in the same way. That's the best I got.
I consider that to mean ownership. Is that the way this word own is used here?
I don't think
that's
so.
What I'm asking.
I don't think so. Like the husband belongs to the woman. That's what it'd be saying.
It's almost like they had more than one male, but there was a husband. I'm just saying.
Yeah, no. Okay, I see what you're saying. But I don't think that's the case.
Okay.
I don't think that's the case.
And then we add to your statement about man and woman is considered the same in the church. But when you read God's word in its entirety, we need to qualify that. That's what I'm saying. The man has a role in the church and the woman has a role in the church, but they're both equal in the eyes of God.
Oh, yeah.
Because the woman can't do what a man's supposed to do, and the man can't do what a woman's supposed to do, but together, like it says, you become one in the holy bonds of matrimony. Mm-hmm. But yet, each has their own role, which one complements the other, or the
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But notice too, before we get off of verse 1 there, that notice the powerful influence that just a person's actions can have. Now, in some of your translations, it's going to say, that even if some do not obey, now watch what it says, the word, that's got to be the gospel. They without, now I read a word, but I bet you a lot of you are seeing the word. So if some do not obey the word, they without the word maybe won by the conduct of their wives. That cannot be talking about, well, they're just going to convert to Christianity without the gospel. That can't be talking about that. And so, and I know when I start talking about the original language and the Greek and stuff, like the eyes start glazing over. But in the original language, that A there is not there. The A or the V in the set before the second word is not there. So it is there, and if some do not obey the logos, that's there. They, literally, the Greek says, they without word may be won by the conduct of their wives. And so a lot of translations are going to add A because it makes no sense whatsoever that they're going to be won over to Christ without Christ's teachings. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, so at some point, you had a comment. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I actually had a family member, and it was somewhere around 30 years. And she was a very submissive wife.
Yeah.
Her husband used to bring and drop her off on Sunday mornings. Then it got to be where he would sit in the car outside in the parking lot. Then he came in for years and just sat there. And finally, he
became a Christian?
Became a Christian.
Wow, yeah.
Close to 30 years.
Yeah, that happens. Yeah, when you hear stories like that, that's pretty amazing to think about. And the patience. The patience. I mean, who knows what conversations were had behind closed doors too about all kinds of stuff, right? So powerful influence without speaking a word. I think this is also an underlying theme that happens in the last chapter, 13 through 16, talking about our relationship to governments. And I think it's an underlying theme talking about servants to masters as well, non-Christian masters. But in this specific relationship here in chapter 3 with husband and wife, Peter's saying, let your actions, there's a time where you got to let your actions do the talking, especially when the talking that's already taken place is not really going anywhere. Now, who's been in that kind of situation? Where you are trying to, let's just say you're trying to teach someone the Bible. And you teach it to them. You teach them, like, let's say, really everything we should start with, what does it take to become a Christian? And then all these other questions can be answered later. But what does it take to become a Christian? Are you sure you're going to heaven? And so you talk about that, and someone says, well, I don't really know about that. And then even in the same study or the same conversation, you just keep pushing it. Like you pushing it and you pushing it and you pushing it. Or every time you see them, you're like, you're pushing it, you're pushing it, and you're pushing it. Or let's say you are trying to get somebody to do the right thing. You're trying to get a son or daughter or fellow brother or sister, and you're trying to get them, or just a neighbor, a friend, you're trying to get them to do the right thing because they're always making mistakes. And you try to get them to, and they just won't do it. They're like, no, I'm gonna do it my own way, or they just don't listen to you. And then you keep on and on and on and on. Eventually what's gonna happen is all you're doing is nagging them. That's how they're gonna see it. Even though you're doing it out of love and you think you're doing the right thing, they're gonna see it as, man, this person will shut up. And you're really going to start doing more harm than good. So probably this is what's going on. Surely the Christian wife says something about her husband obeying the gospel. Please obey the gospel. And here's why I did it, blah, 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 blah. But at some point he's saying, look, and I think, remember, I think some kind of suffering is in the background here that these wives are experiencing from their husbands, from their non-Christian husbands. Like, look, just be submissive so that they may be won by your conduct. Does that make sense? I mean, so there's powerful influence. Our behavior and our actions, the way we carry ourselves, powerful influence. I'm not saying that we just need to be, I think we as Christians need to be wise to know when to speak and when not to speak, right? And I've talked a lot about that before. We got to know when to keep on going, man, keep pushing, because some people need that. And then we need to know when to back off and when to just shut up.
Chuck, the same example that Wilma gave, I was actually waiting for her to give my uncle's name. Uncle Ned from Shady Valley. He would take his wife to the Damascus Church of Christ every time the doors open. And at the time we were attending at Abingdon Church, Abingdon Church of Christ. And when we would come back through Damascus, we would see Ned sitting in the car outside the worship services.
Mm-hmm.
He was in his 80s when he obeyed the gospel. After his wife passed away, now his 2 children are unfaithful.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've thought many times of the example that he set. You know, he went through wars, he went through, you know, a long life,
Mm-hmm.
being raised in a Church of Christ home.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember my grandmother, you know, she would, the chair that she sat in always had a Bible by it, and she would always read her Bible. He knew the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
but he just, for whatever, I don't know, I never walked a mile in his moccasins. I don't know why he did not obey the gospel with the rest of the boys and the rest of the girls. But, you know, Tracy told me one time that he baptized in his mid-80s, and he's still alive and worshiping strong in Damascus.
Well, that's good news.
And, you know, it's something that, you know, if somebody would have quit, you know, reaching out to him, encouraging him, would he ever obey? You know, we don't know, but he did.
Yeah. Well, good. Yeah, that's good. Verse number 2.
So,
Yeah, go ahead. No, go
Sorry,
ahead.
I'm sorry.
I like comments. I really do.
Just, the time here we're reading in here, it was just 2 ways to follow God. It's the old covenant of the new under Christianity, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so the point I want to make is, you know, we read where it does not forsake the priest, do not forsake the assembly of the saints, and I say that to say this in line with what we're talking about, of fear by the Romans and being crucified or punished because you believed in Jesus Christ. That would be harder as an individual to me to accept the word as we're reading here versus today. There's over 200 different denominations roughly out there. All of them think they're right.
I would say there's 30,000.
So with that said, they think that they're right. And some of them say, well, you can believe the way you believe, and I believe the way I believe. But the decision that these wives were trying to get their husbands to make, and they felt possibly that their life was in danger if they became a Christian. Does that make any sense?
You talking about the husbands being
Yeah.
afraid of it? Yeah, sure, yeah.
Because today, everybody thinks they're going to heaven. Everybody. Except for the atheists, of course, and agnostics that are on the fence up there. But I'm just saying, it's easier today just to tell someone why you worship the way you worship, but be willing to listen to why they worship the way they worship. And if it tickles their ear, then they'll say, "Can you tell me more about what persuades you to leave your faith that you were following and become a Christian?" And it's a hard pill to swallow when you ask a Baptist to tell me why he thinks he's a Christian, but yet you'll say, "I'm a Baptist." Is that making any sense?
Yeah, it's hard to be told that, to find out and discover that you were taught wrong.
But the worst thing I ever heard, I knew Levi was his name, and he was a Methodist. And this is what he would tell his wife, who was a Christian, that if mother's in hell, I'm going to hell and be with her. And if my mother is saved, I'm saved. And he believed that with all of his heart, and that's the way he died.
Yeah.
And you didn't dare try to tell him otherwise because you lose him completely.
Right.
So it's hard to talk to a person that has their mind set, just like we've heard about.
Oh yeah.
Daddy. I mean, it's very difficult. You have to be careful. The last thing you want to do is get into an argument over the word.
Right, yeah.
Anyway,
That's that wise as serpents, harmless as doves kind of approach. I think Jesus knew what he was talking about when he told his disciples to go out and teach like that, with that kind of mindset. Yeah, it's tough. Any more comments? All right, so verse number 2, I think I read that. Observe. It's kind of describing the submissiveness there. So this is kind of, so they were supposed to be submissive, but they were also to do it, to be chaste. And I know the word says fear there, but it's the idea of being respectful or reverent. And I would say certainly that went toward God first, husband second. Chaste means pure. It carries the idea of innocence. Carries the idea of having a character just towards good things, toward doing good. That's the idea there. And so her actions, the wife's actions, were hopefully to make her husband kind of step back for a moment and look at her and wonder about this new religion that his wife is now following, and look at her actions and see that, you know what, she's behaving and she's doing this despite my stupidness. Is what if he was abusing her or hurting her in some way, making her suffer, that she's still acting like, treating me like this because of that Jesus Christ that she says she follows. And that's the idea of, hopefully he's going to be seeing that and win him over. He's not going to, I mean, and I'm not trying to, I don't want to be taking sides, man, woman side. But the idea is that if she were to be combative and fighting, I'm not saying she couldn't defend herself. I'm definitely not going there. But if she were to always be combative and not submissive, then that's probably, he's going to connect that with Christianity right away, you know. And you might as well he'll never obey the gospel, right? So just understand, and that goes along everything with what we're saying about the suffering that was probably taking place in the way women were treated then, and which was not right in the first place. Now, when we connect this chapter 2, verse 2 to verse number 3, verse 2 is actually describing the true beauty that a woman is supposed to show, not only to her husband, but she's to show this kind of beauty to the world. And I don't think that we shouldn't be thinking that just in the last century or so that this immense pressure has been put upon women to look a certain way, even act a certain way, really just look a certain way. I think, of course, I think it's always been that way. It's always been that way, even way back here. Now, of course, the invention of the television and the internet has really just made that a humongous problem, right? For women, especially for young ladies. But I think it's always been this way. That pressure has always been there. It just came in different forms, okay? So verse 2 is the true beauty. Now watch what he says in 3 and 4. Do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranged. Now, you can have a little bit of difference in translation here. Arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart, or the hidden man of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. So, what y'all think about that passage? Women ought to be finding, this is what it's teaching. Christianity teaches that women ought to be finding their dignity, their self-worth in who they are, and not in what they wear, and not how they look. And God is steering all women in the world, especially Christians, obviously, because they got the Bible. God is teaching this and steering women in this direction, and he's using Christianity to do that. And we're being taught that right here. The world, on the other hand, is like doing the very opposite, pretty much. Well, I don't think the world would admit that they're doing it, but that's what's happening. And y'all see it just as much as I do today, right? It's all about your looks. And unfortunately, some parents are like clueless about this, and they raise their children to do what the world is, I mean, just to throw them in there with the wolves, basically, and just do exactly what the world wants them to do, and raise them in a completely opposite direction than this right here. Even the, so this is Christianity teaching this wonderful, beautiful thought that really would just, I think, I don't know, I'm a man, I don't know, I wish I could hop in, I try to hop in my wife's mind sometimes, and dude, it just scares me to death, and I gotta get out of it. But I think that, and it's hard. I'm not downplaying how difficult it must be, because you can't just close yourself off from the world. I mean, as a Christian woman, you gotta be out there, and you gotta do things, and Christian women work and things like that. But I mean, I think if women could do this, is it possible? I think it's possible. If women could really let their self-worth be defined by who they are, and as Christianity like molds them more like Christ, I gotta think that they would have a easier time in life. Just a little bit more peace of mind, a little bit less stress, not so depressed. I mean, ladies, can you, okay, I'm getting some, okay. And so this is Christianity telling us this, but even in the Greco-Roman world, without Christianity, in some moral circles, this thought was not lost on them. So let me give you a couple of examples. Well, let me give you one example here. There's a guy named Plutarch. Ever heard of that guy, Plutarch? He's a first century Greek philosopher, and he says this, he's not a Christian. It's not gold or precious stones or scarlet that makes her such, but whatever invests her with that something which betokens dignity, good behavior, and modesty. That's coming from the world. And he's right. He's got it right. And so what Peter is expressing here, and Paul does the same thing in 1 Timothy 2, 9 through 10, is not really something that's exclusive to Christianity. Even the world, there's moral thinkers, non-Christian moral thinkers, even way back then, realized that there's something very, very good and something very, very right about this way of thinking and behaving among women. Now, any comments?
If you're a Christian woman and you're living right and doing what is right, your beauty is going to show through. Your Christian godly beauty is going to show through.
Yeah.
If you're living an ungodly life, no amount of makeup, gold jewelry, expensive clothing is going to cover up the evil doing.
No, it's like because their inner character kind of melts all that away, and everybody sees it, and they can't hide it. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. Anybody else? I thought I'd actually get a little more. Well, maybe I'm not done yet. I'll get a little more chit chat on this one. Now, we want to caution ourselves not to take this teaching to the extreme that Peter nor Paul in 1 Timothy 2 never intended. So take this verse 3 to the literal extreme. And what do you have? You've got, now you see in your translations, you'll see something like braided hair. God, then if the literal extreme, God would be commanding women never to be concerned about their outward appearance. That's the literal extreme. Never to be concerned about your outward appearance. And God would be condemning women who wore anything at all that their culture would consider with words like nice, fine, or pretty. And I don't think that's the way we ought to be taking this, I think we're going to find ourselves in some trouble with other scriptures.
Isn't the intention to let your inward attractiveness outshine whatever is going on the outside?
Yes, I think there needs to be a priority. That's what's teaching here. There's a priority that's going on here. So this is the same kind of, the thought here is the same thought where Jesus in John 6, verse 27, he had people following him and wanting they were catching up with him because he had just fed 5,000 people with a bunch of food. And they were following him because of the food. And he says this, now watch this. Now take this to the extreme literal, okay? To the extreme literal. So, he says, do not, so there we have a command. Do not labor for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life. Take it to the literal extreme, and what's Jesus commanding us to do? Never work for your food. That's what he's saying. Do not labor for the food which perishes, period. That's the literal extreme. Now, are we supposed to take it that far? Never work for our food? You got 2 Thessalonians 3 telling us that if a man will not work, neither shall he what? You got to work for your food. So, but you understand, this is going to help us understand. I know we're out of time. And I'll probably get on this a little bit more next week. So don't you worry. But you understand John 6:27 properly. What's Jesus doing? He's commanding that spiritual things take priority over material things. That's it. Pursue Jesus first. And then you're going to know how to live in such a way where you can properly provide for yourself, take care of yourself, take care of your family, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Plus, on top of that, you'll be saved from your sins and on your way to heaven. And so what Peter's saying to these women here, be concerned first with your inward beauty that's cultivated by Christ-like thinking and behavior. You be concerned with that over and above outward beauty. That's what he's saying. And I think that makes sense. And I do have some more stuff to say. And maybe like if there's some problems, there's more problems that arise with the extreme literal view of this, where women can't be braiding their hair, or when no wedding rings and things like that. I mean, that's how far it would go. And so we can, if you want to get into it, we can talk about it a little more. And I got a pretty funny quote for you too, so look forward to that. But I won't be here next Wednesday, so you're gonna have to wait 2 weeks. And I shall return, and we shall finish going over that verse, and we'll keep going. All right. Anybody want to close it out with an amazing comment? Thank you, Doug. All right.